Hello, everybody. And today I want to talk a little bit about essay number one and the expectations. Now, look, this is the first essay of the semester, and we're doing this class virtually, and you might feel a little bit anxious or at sea or whatever. But I want to assure you that, first of all, this first draft itself is not graded, and you will get feedback on the draft. And second of all, nobody's expecting miracles on the first essay of basic comp of the semester. So I want you to feel, this is really a learning opportunity as much as anything. And the whole point, of course, of basic comp is to get you ready for XPOS. And so the essay assignment is very similar, and the structure of the essay is very similar to the kind of thing you'll do in XPOS. And so what we're really just trying to get our feet wet with the basics of what an essay should look like in the Rutgers writing program. So first of all, take a deep breath and don't be too anxious now. This first draft is due Sunday night, and there was an error in the what do we got here? What does this look like? There was an error in the original announcement, and hopefully you've seen the correction by now about that. It's due Sunday night before midnight, and basically I'd like to start working on grading them on Monday morning. Also, in between first draft and final draft, we'll also be doing some workshopping of sample student work together so that you can get a sense of what I'm looking for when I grade and things like that. But for the first draft, like I don't think we should worry too much about, it seems strange to say, I don't think we should over prepare for this first draft, right? Because it's a kind of baseline for how well we can do left to our own devices. However, of course, I do have some guidance for you to consider. And the first thing you should be aware of, now, of course, the essay is about Tuffici and Nagel. And it asks you to take those two readings and to make an argument about free speech. Now, that is not easy because the essays in and of themselves are like, Nagel's essay is not specifically about free speech. It's about toxic internet culture, right? But of course, you should be able to see the kind of connection between what Tuffici argues in her essay, some of the problematic things about speech that we've discussed already, and what Nagel sort of gives us an example of in her essay. So, how you execute it is, of course, up to you. You'll want to zero in on important passages from each text. So the paper should have a lot of quotation in it from the text, a lot of close reading. That's where you take an actual quote from the author and then sort of examine that quote in some detail in order to use it to support a claim that you're making. And that's a skill that you'll develop over the course of the semester. But let's go, if you go into files, you should find this essay structure handout. Under handouts, basic essay structure, and there's also a rubric I could talk a little bit about as well. I'd rather you not get too hung up on the rubric yet, but certainly worth looking at. All right, let's open this essay structure handout and just sort of walk you through it. You can see actually this is the same essay structure. It says XPOS 101 on it. This is the same essay structure handout for XPOS and for basic comp. It's the same thing. There's no sense in which in XPOS you're expected to do something different than what you're going to be doing here. This really is preparation. The biggest difference is that the assignment questions themselves are a little simpler, and the length of the essay is shorter. Our final draft will be 4 pages. At XPOS, you do 5. And the essay question is a little more targeted and a little less open. All right, so structure. Every essay, of course, you probably know this already. Every essay has a basic 3-part structure. If you've gone through The American education system, you already know this, three-part structure. And at this point in time, if we had a class, I would ask somebody to tell me what it is, because I'm sure all of you know it. But it's introduction, body, and conclusion. And so this is a little outline that takes you through, okay, what is an intro? What should an intro do? What is the body? And what is the conclusion? What should the conclusion do? Intro, body, conclusion. That's the same thing you probably learned if you came through the American education system, which a lot of you didn't, let's be honest. We have a fair number of international students, but okay. You probably have been learning about intro, body, conclusion since, I don't know, 6th grade or so. That same basic structure is still there. Of course, what we're doing with the structure is a little more sophisticated, I hope, at least. Okay, so starting with the introduction, right? The first thing you're going to write in the paper, the first paragraph. The purpose of the introduction is to introduce the reading subject matter to be discussed and to present your own original thesis responding to the issues presented in said readings. And the thesis, of course, is the most important part of the introduction. The thesis is the sentence in the introduction that presents your argument. That's something you probably learned. If I ask you what is a thesis, you probably understand that the thesis is where you have like the main idea of the essay. But even beyond main idea, the thesis is the sentence, or sometimes more than one sentence, that encapsulates your argument. And it always must be present and clear in the introduction. You don't save your argument for the conclusion, it's okay to spoil it in the introduction. We should know by the end of the introduction exactly what it is the essay is going to try to convince us of. Okay. So every introduction should provide a basic introductory framework for the subject matter to be explored. Every introduction should name the readings that will form your core sources. There's two readings we have. There are 2 readings for our essay number 1. There's Nagel and Tufekci, and they should be named somewhere in the introduction. Usually like the 3rd sentence or so. Let me show you a quick example of what that looks like. No harm in doing that, I guess. But at some point, the introduction should identify the readings to be discussed. And there's only 2 sources. Those 2 readings are the only things you're using in the essay. And so don't go to Wikipedia and get other stuff. Don't research other articles on the internet and use them in the paper. Just Nagel and Tufekci. That's it. Those are the only 2 sources that you should be using in the paper. Why does it make me log back in? So, hang on a second. Let's pause so you don't have to see me. I want to be right back. Okay, so if you look here, let's zoom in on this a little bit. Can I do that? Yeah. That's actually good. Somewhere in the introduction, you should identify the sources, right? Zeynep Tufekci's article, "It's the Democracy Poison Killing to Free Speech," discussed censorship and free speech via social media. "The New Man of 4chan" by Angela Nagel goes into detail about the warped world of beta and incel culture on 4chan. Somewhere in the article, in the essay, in the introduction, you should identify the sources that you're going to be writing about. Where and how you do that can vary, but it should be there somewhere in the introduction. The introduction should briefly describe the subject matter of the source readings, or just tell me a little bit about what those articles are about and sort of tie them back to the thesis. And the thesis should always be the last thing in the introduction. I mean, it's not a law or anything. Some people, it's possible to envision the thesis being elsewhere, but as a best practice, I think the end of the introduction should be where we find the thesis statement. So conclude with a thesis. usually one sentence, but potentially two, that presents an original argument that is responsive to the essay prompts, right? So make sure it's addressing the essay question in some way, and that builds on, rather than simply restates, the ideas of the source reading. So your thesis should not be Taficci's thesis, should not be Nagel's thesis. It should be your thesis that somehow builds on what you've read. Usually in a kind of synthesis, right? You're looking at two articles that are very different. They don't have a lot to do with each other explicitly, but in looking at them together, you're able to synthesize in a sort of original argument. And that is tricky. It is a very high order skill, but we're starting to work on that now, so that by the end of the semester, you're ready to hit the ground running in XPOS. And like I said, if things go well in this class, when you get to XPOS, not only will you be prepared for XPOS, but you will be golden in XPOS, right? You'll be there the first day, ready to crush it. Usually how it works, because you'll know you'll already have had 4 essays under your belt of experience. Yes, introductions are extremely important. In essence, they provide the blueprint for all that will follow. Everything in the body can't highlight for some reason. That's right. Everything in the body. There we go. Everything in the body paragraphs should in some way serve to support the argument that has been established in the introduction/thesis. Right. The job of the body, too, is to support that thesis. And the way you're going to support it is through textual evidence, through using the readings, right? The purpose of the body paragraph is to support the thesis statement through close analysis of source evidence from your readings. This is where you will be evaluated on the work with the text criteria. On the grading rubric, you can find it if you look at it, the rubric. I'll probably talk more about the rubric between drafts, right? I really don't want you to be thinking too much about it, about like grades and stuff. This draft isn't even graded, but the rubric is there if you want to look at it. And so one of the categories on the rubric is how well you work with text. There is no fixed number of body paragraphs, right? You don't have to have 3. You don't have to have a 5-paragraph essay. 2 is usually the absolute minimum. I don't think you could write a good essay with just 1 body paragraph. You should write as many body paragraphs as seem appropriate to you. Now, okay, how do they work? 1, they should begin with a topic sentence. Important. These topic sentences should express the main idea of the paragraph itself and should be ideas of your own. Topic sentences should never be quotes. Never be quotes or paraphrases of sources or general statements about source ideas. So the topic sentence shouldn't be, in Zeynep Taficci's article, she says yada, 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 and then you describe what Taficci says, right? It should be an idea. It should be an idea in your own voice. And the use of Taficci or Nagel will come later in the body paragraph to support the things you're trying to say, right? There is a temptation in a 2-source essay like this to be like, well, I'll do 1 paragraph on Nagel and then 1 paragraph on Taficci and call it a day. That's not really what we're looking for. We're not looking for summaries of the 2 readings. We're looking for an original argument that uses those 2 readings. All body paragraphs should contain quotes from sources that can be connected somehow to the point you are trying to make in said paragraph, right? These quotes should be preceded by signal phrases, right? According to Taficci, right? As Nagel writes, right? Some kind of attribution clause, right? The quote always should have some kind of attribution phrase or clause before it, and followed by analysis or explanation of some kind. So you have the quote, but then so you precede the quote with some kind of lead in, right? But then following the quote, you have some kind of explanation or analysis. The quote never stands alone on its own. The quote never is like self-evidently important. You have to explain to me what matters about the quote. Very important. Where were we? Often the analysis of a quote will serve to meaningfully connect it to the point you yourself are trying to make, either by explaining or developing the ideas it contains, or at times by pointing out the shortcomings or problems with the ideas expressed, right? So you could, sometimes you disagree with what an author's saying, and the analysis could take that form, right? Taficci is saying X, however, she's failing to consider why. That's fine too, whatever. As long as there's some kind of analytical component following the quote where you are explaining the quote in some way, either why it's important or why it matters to the point you are making, maybe why it's wrong, even sometimes that happens, right? But in any case, analysis or explanation of quotes is the most important part of any body paragraph. No claims you make will carry sufficient weight unless they can be supported by textual analysis. All right, so topic sentence, right? Then you're making your point. You're using the text in support of your point, and you're following the quotes with analysis, right? And really embrace the idea of the close reading aspect of these body paragraphs, where you're taking the quote and you're sort of digging into it, because that's how you flesh out the paper. Students sometimes complain to me like, oh, I couldn't fill up 4 pages. And I always say to them, well, find more passages to work with, right? Do more close reading, do more analysis. It's always a sure way to not just get the paper longer, but to get it longer in a substantive and meaningful way, right? By working more closely with the source text. And, of course, body paragraphs, where possible, should be connected by transitions. Transitional language creates a sense of connection between body paragraphs. And I'm sure you've learned about that before, but basically, it's nice if the shifts between paragraphs are not too abrupt or sudden, if you have language that connects one, right? Additionally, in addition to X, we can also consider Y, right? Language that pushes you from one paragraph to the next. Maybe I can show you a good example of that too in this. Sometimes there's a word like furthermore works as a transition, right? I wouldn't say it's a great transition, but it is transitional language, right? To continue. This student has used some basic transitions to continue. Furthermore, I'll find a better one. Trying to keep the names blacked out here. So let's see. Last but not least, I guess that's technically transitional language. Even basic stuff like furthermore, in addition to, or, are examples of transitional language that just help create a sense of flow in your topic sentences as you move from one paragraph to the next. Not as important. That's less important than the analysis thing, than the textual analysis and the topic sentences, but it is something to consider. And again, when we get to the specific example of workshopping, after you do the rough drafts, you'll be able to see some of this in more concrete terms. Then the conclusion. And I always joke, the conclusion is the part of the essay that the professor never reads. And believe me, well, no. I was about to say, believe me, when we're in face-to-face classes, it always gets a good laugh. But actually it doesn't, because I'm the only one that gets it. And the joke is that students have been sort of taught that the conclusion should just be summing up and repeating your main points and should not have anything new. And well, if it doesn't have anything new, why should I read it? So the main purpose, that is the main purpose of the conclusion, to pull back from the specificity of the body paragraphs by restating your main arguments. Oh, wait, pen. I don't know that I like that either. That's a little too. Yeah, I don't really like the pen thing. But anyway, restating your main argument and summarizing your main ideas. It's the main purpose of the conclusion. However, conclusions are also the section of the essay where you should feel free to speculate beyond the narrow bounds of the thesis in considering additional ramifications of the subject matter in the essay. In other words, try to give me something new in the latter half of the conclusion, even if, or especially if, it moves beyond your main argument. I mean, I always try to say this, like the conclusion. I'm going to erase this stupid pen here. Get out of here. The conclusion is like, in a sense, it's a little bit of a free play area. There's not much you could do in the conclusion to screw it up. If you're getting the restating the main points and restating the thesis, you get that out of the way. The rest of the conclusion is kind of yours to sort of be speculative, to think in grand terms, to push beyond the bounds of the essay a little bit and leave your reader thinking. I'll be honest that the conclusion doesn't often have a huge impact on the grade, but to the extent that it does, it needs to do the basic things it needs to do. And it's nice if it can, like I said, leave the reader with something to chew on beyond that. All right. Write the best essay you can. And here, remember, this is a 101 handout. That's why it says things like what you learned in 100. And more specific guidance in terms of examples and workshop questions will be forthcoming to help you improve the essay during the revision process. So this is not the final say here, right? So again, you've got two sources, Tuffici and Nagel. Those are your two sources for the essay. And you need to make sure that you are pulling out some good quotes from both of those readings, right, in your body paragraphs. You want to make sure you have a thesis in the introduction, some kind of guiding principle or argument for the whole paper. You know, if this seems a little formulaic, that's because it is. There is a formula to academic essay writing. And students can sometimes find that constricting or sort of stultifying or dull. And I guess it can be all of those things. But there's also a benefit to adhering to the rigor of what the formula is asking you to do, right? So not just sort of throwing all your ideas on the page, but actually crafting something that has a logic and a flow to it. Intro, body, conclusion, thesis statement, close reading passages, right? Conclusion, summing up and restating the conclusion. And in any case, you're going to have to do it in XPOS. So the training begins now. All right. So that's the basic essay structure handout. That's the basics of what I want you to accomplish. Remember, this is not graded. Write the best draft you can, though, so that you can get the best feedback possible. Plus, the better the draft is, the less work there will need to be in revision. And after the drafts are submitted, we'll have an opportunity to look at some sample work in more concrete terms before the final is due. If you look at the assignment sheet, it says final due date TBA. That's because I'm not going to give you a due date for the final until I know when I'm getting the feedback back to you. That's dependent on me. So if I get it back to you by midweek, then it'll be due, beginning of the next week, something like that. But just all you have to worry about right now is getting that first draft in. So if you have questions, shoot me an email or post something on the Canvas page or whatever. And good luck. I look forward to reading them.